What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. My name is Nash, and today I'm going to be going over how you can answer any question related to Microsoft Excel. Now, I'm assuming that you are applying for a job where you have to use Microsoft Excel working with data, and and it's important enough for them to ask you during an interview, right? That means it's really important. So I want to show you how to always answer that question correctly, and I'm going to be giving this from a different perspective, right? From the perspective of the employer and the knowledge of someone who actually works with Microsoft Excel. All right, so there's going to be two ways that they're going to ask you this question. So the first one is going to be, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? That's a yes or no answer, right? And sometimes they like to be direct. It might be, can you tell me a time where you use Microsoft Excel to, do this task? Which formulas did you use? Something very specific. And sometimes they might go the route of, do you know how to use Vlookups, right? Directly. That way, you're not going to lie. If you don't know how to use them, you don't, right? They can ask this question in many ways, but they're all looking for the same answer. All right, so let me break this down. So the first thing that companies are looking for if they're trying to hire someone who knows how to use Microsoft Excel, it's going to be data cleanup. So cleaning up data is a really, really important part of finance, accounting, of working with data in general, right? Sometimes you have to think about the data source. Where are you getting the data? Maybe you work as a financial analyst, and if you're looking to do, look for something, you can get data from the database. It might be an Oracle database, or sometimes it might be working with clients. So you ask clients to send you data, and your job is to clean that data up, right? So let's say, for example, I'm going to use great examples in this video, so to make sure that you guys are following. And you can always ask me questions on Instagram. It should be on the screen, somewhere on the screen here. You can always DM me if you have any questions, or you can always leave them in the comment section below. All right, so let's say your supervisor is asking for you to find the revenue that the company has made for the past 20 years, right? And you ask yourself, where am I going to get this data? So you go to an Oracle database or whatever database they have, you download the data. Now it happens that the data that downloaded, it does have the revenue for every year that goes back to 20 years or however long back it goes. Maybe it goes 30 years, or it pulls data that for the entire existence of the company. Let's say that's 50 years, right? And you also have things like expenses. You have things like, just a bunch of things on there. But the information you need is in there. So that is where data cleanup comes. So for this specific example, the way you clean up this data is going to be, you're going to pull out the year, and you're going to pull out the revenues, right? Because that is the data that your supervisor asked for. Now, this is a very simple example. Sometimes it might be multiple things, but I just want to use two things so that, it doesn't get complicated. If I was going to ask you, hey, how would you clean up this data? If you want, you can pause the video and put it in the comment section below. But if I ask you that, a lot of people would say, oh, I'll just delete what I don't need and leave the year and the revenue. Now I have the data I want, which is correct. Now, let's say you do that and you submit that to your supervisor. And after a couple of days, he's like, actually, can I get the expenses? I'm trying to make sure that, these revenues kind of like match up with the expenses and things like that. And you're like, oh, I deleted the expenses. Now you have to go back to the database and you have to pull that same data again. Maybe it took you time to pull the data because it's a lot of data. It's going back 50 years and you want to filter out to like only 20 years and things like that. So now you have to repeat the same process, right? That creates a lot of manual labor for you, right? Which is what we're trying to avoid by using Microsoft Excel. So what companies are looking for is people that know how to use pivot tables. That is the best and possibly only formula that's going to allow you to manipulate data in all kinds of ways, to clean up data, all kinds of ways without getting rid of it, right? You're not deleting it, you're just rearranging it. So let me explain what pivot tables do. I know I have a video on this. So if you want, after this video, you can go ahead and look up, just look through my videos, you find it, how to use pivot tables, and I explain what they actually do. So pivot tables are going to allow you to rearrange the data. You can, put anything in the columns, anything in the rows. It's really, really simple. So what pivot tables are going to allow you to do is essentially, let's say you say, oh, what I need is the revenue, and you also need the years, and you also need the expenses, right? If those are the things you're trying to pull. What you can do is you can create a pivot table that's going to allow you to just show that data, right? So it will create another tab in Microsoft Excel. It just has the data that you want. So you can even have the years in the columns, and you can have, the type, the revenues on the rows and things like that, where it makes sense. So pivot tables allow you to rearrange the data how you want it. And sometimes when you look at raw data, if you're just looking at numbers, like sometimes they don't make sense to you. But if you use a pivot table, you can make it however you want it to make sense. So sometimes your supervisor is going to ask you, can you arrange the data this way, right? He's not going to tell you like use a pivot table to arrange the data this way. Your job is to know how to use a pivot table. So that is the first thing that companies are looking for. Someone who knows how to clean up data. And how do you clean up data? You use pivot tables. So go ahead and watch my pivot table video, watch other videos, learn how to use pivot tables, because this is a huge part of working with data. You have to clean up the data. All right. So number 2 is going to be validating the data using Vlookups. So Vlookups are really important. I'm going to explain a little more. I believe I do have a video on Vlookups as well. So you can go through my page and you can find that and watch that. Vlookups are really important, and these can be used in the process of reconciliation, right? So if we go back to our example that we're using, where you had to pull the data for the past 30 years and you're pulling the revenues and expenses, right? So let's say you did a pivot table and you have the data that's needed. Your supervisor likes it. Now he's looking into this, right? He's looking into what's the information in the database that you use to create this pivot table. And then he goes into, the accounting software and he pulls the same data. He pulls the data for the past 30 years, revenues and expenses. But for some reason, he's seeing that the numbers do not match, right? He does the sum formula to sum up the data from the database that you provided and the data that he pulled from the accounting software, right? He's like, the totals don't match. Now, he's going to ask you, hey, can you find out why they don't match? Now, your job is going to be using Vlookups to look up the things that do not match. So I've explained Vlookups before in previous videos, but essentially what they allow you to do is vertically look up for answers, right? So using a Vlookup, what I can do is I can look at the number that is on this side, right? Let's say that's a number that came from the accounting system. And the Vlookup is going to allow me to look up this number in this side, right? Which is the data from the database, and to see if that number exists in there. And if the number exists in here, it's going to return that same number. But if the number does not exist, it's going to return an error. All you have to do is do it once and you drag the formula all the way down. And after you're done with that, you can just use a filter to filter out all the errors. And now you can see, okay, these are the numbers that do not match. And after that, that's when you use your analytical thinking skills to find out why the numbers don't match. You might even, talk to the accountants. You can talk to different people. That's a different story for a different video. My point is, if you know how to use Vlookups, you can quickly find discrepancies, differences between these two data sets, right? So this kind of like cuts the work in half. Imagine if you're trying to go line by line. Okay, does this number in 1992, match what was posted in our accounting software, and you have to scroll down manually, having to do that for 30, 40 years worth of data. That is a lot of work. So Vlookups allow you to discover these discrepancies. So that is why that is the number 2 and final thing that you have to know. Now, to kind of like circle back. So if jobs are asking you if you know how to use Microsoft Excel, if they're asking you specific questions related to Microsoft Excel, they're trying to find out if you know how to clean up the data, if you know how to validate or reconcile the data. And what comes after that is going to be you applying your analytical thinking skills. I'm assuming that you probably went to college. You have these analytical thinking skills, to do research to find out why things don't match. But on the surface, Microsoft Excel is not going to give you those answers. There's obviously things you can do to kind of like figure that out, formulas and things like that. But the two main formulas that companies are looking for, they're going to be pivot tables and Vlookups. So if they ask you, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? How have you used Microsoft Excel? You can say something along the lines of, I like to use pivot tables to clean up the data and rearrange to make sure that the data is visually appealing, make sure that I only have data that's applicable to the project I'm working on. And you can say that I like to use Vlookups to find, the discrepancies in the data when I'm comparing it to a different set of data, or if I'm looking for specific things, I can use Vlookups. So that is something that I would say. Now, sometimes after that, whenever they ask you, do you know how to use Microsoft Excel? And you give them an answer, oh yes, I know how to use Microsoft Excel. I've used this to create a budget, whatever. That's what a lot of people would say. The follow-up question is going to be, have you used Vlookups before? Have you used pivot tables before? So if you just give them all the information on the first answer, they're going to be like, you know what, you definitely know what you're talking about, right? Because you talked about Vlookups and pivot tables without them having to ask you directly, do you know how to use this formula, this function? All right, so 2 things to remember. Pivot tables and Vlookups. That's it. So that is pretty much it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.